Accessing Agent Files. Brian Sovryn. Early 21st century anarchist. Creator and host of the podcast Sovryn Tech. By the year 2021, the show would be instrumental in the downfall of various conservative ideologies in the government, helping usher in an incredible time.
Hey, want to take a walk on the wild side and experience the bleeding edge of technology? Then get ready, because it doesn't get much more edgy than this. You're in for a wild ride. You're listening to Sovryn Tech. Tired of boring specials about history, science, and technology? Then get on your best headphones, because you might want to lay down for this. A Sovryn Tech special with the world's foremost anarchist technophile, Brian Sovryn. He has a huge, well, you know. And now, here's Brian.
Oh yes, the Libertine-in-Chief here with you for another great episode of Sovryn Tech. And you know, I'm on location again, and I've got a special here for you. So it's not exactly another episode, but it's a special. Anyway, I just thought I'd do something fun. People seem to really enjoy the top 8 that I did last time for nonfiction books. Now, this is a top 8 that nobody really requested, though, but I thought it'd be kind of fun to do, so I figured I'd record it. And since I'm going away, you know, I said to myself, hey, self, let's do this. Let's give them something extra, because, you know, when I go away, I like to let the Sovereign Naughty play, okay? And anyway, this week it's going to be a top 8 again, and it's going to be the greatest science fiction movies, the top 8 science fiction movies of all time. And, you know, always, I'm not going to put them in any, like, you know, what's actually number one, except that, well, I may tell you what number one is, but otherwise they're not really in any particular order. They just are, you know, and 8 is a totally arbitrary number, just like a top 5 or a top 3 or a top 10 is completely arbitrary. You know, talk about something that's some bullshit. Everybody's like, oh, everything comes in threes. Well, your mind makes everything into threes. Not everything comes in threes. Now, there might be some truth to, like, where the idea of the Trinity came from and the importance of 3 of that, like perhaps Samael and 2 other, well, I'm not even going to go there. But anyway, but other than that, most of the time, all this stuff like, oh, deaths happen in threes. It's like, no, actually, deaths happen in the millions by the day. That's ridiculous to say that everything happens in threes. So, you know, I picked an arbitrary number, and I've never really seen anybody do a top 8. So I was like, well, I'll do a top 8 for everything. And so I'm going to be doing quite a few of these, like I said before, during the top 8 nonfiction books. And this happens to be the one about science fiction films in particular. So just because it seems, I mean, I don't know, some of these, I'm not sure. Some of them I've done for the climax, or what used to be pick of the week. And I just, you know, I want to make sure I get to them, or kind of put them all together. That way everybody doesn't have to sit through me talking about these things. But anyway, you know, I guess I will start to some degree with what I consider actually to be the greatest science fiction movie of all time. And not just the greatest science fiction movie of all time, but perhaps the greatest movie of all time. Now, I want to make clear on this, I didn't include anything that's really part of, except for one that, you know, that might be up to debate, but I didn't put anything in that's not part of like a franchise or part of a whole series of films. You know, maybe they had offshoot TV shows, but they never, they weren't, you know, there's not like a whole bunch of films, kind of like the Star Trek series. Because actually, you know, one of the greatest movies ever is Star Trek: The Motion Picture. I know not everybody agrees with me on that. Most Star Trek fans love Star Trek 2 or First Contact, and then, you know, they move on from there. But I thought Star Trek: The Motion Picture was so good because Starfleet, for once, actually solves everything peacefully, you know, instead of firing phasers. In fact, the Enterprise never shoots its phasers once. It shoots a torpedo at an asteroid because of a, you know, problem that occurs by creating a wormhole. But it's really great to see a movie where Starfleet actually lives up to its, you know, quote-unquote mission statement. Anyway, so I love that film, and it's got a great feel. They were definitely shooting for a cerebral thing, but I didn't count that in this because, there's a bunch of Star Trek movies. It's really not fair to compare them, and you need so much history to understand why Star Trek the Motion Picture is great. You have to know who Captain Kirk is. You have to, you can watch it blank, I suppose, but to some degree you got to know who these characters are because they have a history. So I didn't want to count that in with, the greatest science fiction movies of all time. So this is a standalone list. And we'll start off with the first one. And boy, this really is, I consider it, and actually up until The Matrix came out, which The Matrix won't be making this list because it's part of a series. I thought that this was the greatest movie of all time up until The Matrix came out. And then, of course, The Matrix ended up having sequels. And so that it kind of regained the place in my heart as being the top science fiction movie of all time. And that's Dune. Dune, the movie, and it's from the one from 1980, was it 1984, right? And just a fantastic movie. And I love what Harlan Ellison has to say, and it's amazing, really, because so many people pan this film, so many people hate this film because they don't think it makes sense or whatever. So it's amazing that Harlan Ellison, a guy who hates everything, okay, and of course he's the author, and really a hero of mine, that he loves this movie. And his reasons for enjoying the movie Dune is, he goes down the list. He says, look, it's a book that should have never been made into a movie. It's a movie that should have never been shot. It's a movie, he just goes down the list that it's just the impossible film. And a lot of other people have said, this movie really deserves some reconsideration, especially 30 years down the line. And we are, I guess, fittingly perhaps, we are in the 30th anniversary of this film. It was done in 1984. We're now in 2014. David Lynch directed it. And one of the, it's easy to just want to compare it to the Loxes that the Sci-Fi Channel made out of Dune books. Loxes are bad things. And especially with the Dune miniseries that they made. Now, please, Sean Young was beautiful. She did a great job as and has real presence and did a great job as Chani. But Barbara Kodetova in the Sci-Fi Channel miniseries of Dune, which is not the greatest movie ever, the 1984 David Lynch Dune is. Definitely far more enjoyed her as Chani, especially in the director's cut, if you know what I mean. And if you've seen it, you know what I mean. But this is with the Sci-Fi Channel one, which a lot of people seem for some reason to like better. There's so many things that were positively annoying. Like, why did they keep calling the Harkonnens the Harkonnens? As to where with the original Dune movie that came out in 84, Frank Herbert was on the set. He was there. He could tell you, no, it's pronounced this way. And so for them to think that you need to change the way the word Harkonnen is said, it was very strange. The Sci-Fi Channel movies took way too much creative license, shook things up. It was nuts. Though I did appreciate they pulled off some, admittedly, if you're into not wanting to see explicit content, the original Sci-Fi Channel version of the Dune, the miniseries that they made, not the 1984 film, okay? They had an incredibly tasteful orgy without really showing an orgy. It was amazing. They had a very tasteful sex scene between Chani and Paul Atreides, of course. And yeah, if you don't know what Dune's about, boy, it's tough to say. It's really about the rise of a young messiah on a planet in the year 10,191. And that being Paul Atreides, who's part of the family, the House Atreides. And, he ends up becoming Paul Muad'Dib, and he becomes a messianic figure on this planet. And this planet is unique because it has this, the planet Dune, or also known as Arrakis, has this very unique element there called the spice that gets mined there, and the spice is vital for space travel across the veritable galactic empire that's there. And so it's all about him freeing these people. It's so intricate, it's very tough to describe. But it's a great movie. It has a fantastic style. David Lynch always brings a specific style to anything that he does, even though he really wanted to get separated from this film. And this movie, the original, the 1984 Dune, comes in a multitude of formats. There is what they call the Alan Smithy version. Now, Alan Smithy is a pseudonym that a director uses in Hollywood if they don't want to be attached to the project. So anytime you see Alan Smithy, there is no Alan Smithy. There's just somebody who didn't want their name in the credits. Okay? And so that's what happened there. There's this like Alan Smithy version that's 4 hours. It's 4 hours when it's aired on network television. It's actually, only like 3 hours in reality. Not even that, actually. And there's a theatrical version that everybody kind of knows and loves, and that runs about 2 hours, a little under 2 hours. There's also the Spice Driver version, which is a fan-made version which puts in tons of deleted scenes. Now, that one literally does run about 4 hours, and that has everything. And that's really that's my favorite version of the film. Though, one could argue that I grew up on the Alan Smithy version when watching it. So it's a tremendous film to see. There's a lot there. It's actually, ironically, it's kind of sexy. I think, had a great cast. A great cast. Jürgen Prochnow, Max von Sydow, Patrick Stewart's in it. This is a role that he had before he did Star Trek The Next Generation. How many people even know that he acted before Star Trek The Next Generation? Of course, he had Kyle MacLachlan, who would later on continue to work with David Lynch, like in Twin Peaks. Fantastic movie. It really was. And there's nothing else quite like it out there. And you don't have to read the book. Believe me, the book is a very different animal from the film, but the film just stands so much on its own. And it's one of those movies, and this is seemingly what David Lynch always does. It's just really cool, to see. There's nothing else quite like it out there. I do recommend, if you watch the Alan Smithy version has like this 20-minute opening prologue, or it's not 20 minutes, but it feels like that really explains the Dune universe very well, that you don't get when you watch the theatrical version. Okay. And so I've always told people the order within which to explore the Dune film is watch the Alan Smithy version. Okay. Then watch, you can, if you got through that, if you dug that, you can either watch the theatrical version or the Spice Driver version at that point. Okay. And people have the aptitude now to watch, when I was growing up, nobody wanted to watch a movie over 2 hours. Like Braveheart was this oddity for being 3.5 hours long. But now with Lord of the Rings, I guess everybody watches 6-hour movies. So, so what the hell? So then you can watch the Spice Driver version, or, what I like to call the theatrical version. I actually call it the fast food version, because if you want a quick fix of this tremendous universe, that you watch with Dune, you can just watch you can watch the theatrical version. So the theatrical version stands as just a way to really whet your appetite whenever you need to watch a movie. I don't know if anyone else does that. I mean, sometimes, to me, Dune is a very inspirational film. In the books, boy, you want inspiration. There's so much wisdom in the entire Dune series. It's amazing. In fact, there's a Twitter account called Tweets of Dune, and it's awesome. I mean, you get great quotes from the books all the time. Not to say that the movie does that, but it certainly can remind you of the books if you've read the books. So, fantastic movie. And to just, with movies, like I said, if it's an inspirational film, sometimes you just want a little inspiration. And so you want to, maybe watch your favorite scenes from a movie for a while. I mean, that's how YouTube got originally popular, right? Is that people were compiling their favorite scenes from things, and people would go to YouTube and watch it and get millions of views, and they'd use it as a degree of inspiration. And nothing wrong with that. I think that's fine. So Dune, fantastic movie. I put it as for me, greatest movie of all time. That's up until, that could change. If they ever actually make the Harlan Ellison screenplay of I, Robot into an actual film, I would, that might take the cake. Or if they ever make movies the Foundation series by Isaac Asimov, that might take the cake. But of course, that would be a huge series of films. And, get ready for that. At some point, that's just like an untapped resource that Hollywood's kind of been holding out on. I think when Hollywood finally goes broke, they're just going to go for broke with the Foundation series and, make a shit ton of money, which they will certainly do. So anyway, in this Dune I'm talking about, this is not was Alejandro Jodorowsky that film that he made. That's a whole different story, and I'm not even going to go down that. So let's move on. Let's go to the next movie. So we got one down. We talked way too long about it, which is Dune. The next movie would be Metropolis. And this is really... Metropolis is something else. This is a movie. It's made by Fritz Lang. It's kind of the original in some ways. Yes, there are a couple things that are actually older, I'm aware. Okay, but in some ways, it's really kind of the first science fiction movie. It's from 1927. This is, and it's from a time where... this is real epic, but it's from a time, during silent film, so there's no talking during it, so this is not something you can really enjoy while you're multitasking, because you have to read the subtitles. They are part of the film. There's so much going on screen, you really have to see it, and there's a lot to take in. It's hard to believe when you look at the scope of this movie. It's hard to believe it's from 1927, but this is really, boy... The reach, the legacy of this film is still being felt to this day. It's really something. And, this is all about, there's essentially two classes of humanity. Again, keep in mind, this is 1927. Okay, you have two classes of humanity. You kind of have the worker class, then you have sort of the more scientific class, or the upper class, however you want to put it. And to try and stop a revolt of the lower class against sort of the upper class, there is a robot is made to emulate this character named Maria, who is kind of the leader. The sort of the prophetic leader against the upper class, okay? And there's just, talk about something that's full of like esotericism and occultism. This movie is loaded with it, and it's kind of creepy. And like I said about the legacy, most pop artists, especially female pop artists, at some point play out the character of Maria, which... people might want to find kind of weird after you watch this movie. I think you'll really understand. It is a film also that is not entirely restored. There's quite a bit of it that disappeared. There's quite a few minutes of the film that just nobody could find. And then a few years ago, about a decade ago, finally some people found some more of the film, and that got released in 2008. So even if you watched it, in the 90s, or if you watched it years ago, it's worth a rewatch, because now they've incorporated a lot of this lost footage. There's still about 5 minutes missing, and apparently it's like a fight scene and something else. But the conspiracy theorist in me has to wonder about what was in those 5 minutes of film, because believe me, you watch this. And you're going to wonder, like, hell, I'm not going to go into that. If you want to know about that, I'll talk about it during an important email segment. You can email me if you want me to talk about Metropolis. But I think if you see it, and especially if you've got that more anarchist or liberty mindset, you might go, boy, that's kind of weird. That movie was a little odd. It might raise some red flags. So anyway, check out Metropolis. Make sure you get the 2008 version of it. Definitely a lot more definitive. And we'll probably never see this movie in its actual entirety, unfortunately, as much as I would like to do that. Speaking of conspiracy, so while we're at it, one of my favorite films, and a film that a lot of conspiracists actually use, especially they use a lot of the quotes, they use the plot, they use video from the film and all that, and that's They Live. And this is a movie from 1988, starring Rowdy Roddy Piper. Who was a wrestler. For those that don't know, he was actually a tremendous athlete, great wrestler. It also had Keith David in it, that most people will recognize his voice pretty much instantaneously, because he's done a lot of voiceover work, but he was also Goliath. He did the voice of Goliath in the great cartoon series Gargoyles, the 90s cartoon series Gargoyles. That I love that show. Real serious cartoon, especially when it was definitely marketed towards children. But they're in this, and Meg Foster's in it too. But anyway, this whole movie is about essentially, this guy, the economy's down because it's taking place in 80s America. And he kind of runs into this group of people, this sort of group of revolutionaries. And they have these sunglasses. And they're warning this group of quote unquote revolutionaries. They're transmitting, there's like this guy that's a preacher, and he's telling everybody, look, turn off the television. It's all, they're dumbing us down. They're controlling our minds. They're making us apathetic, and they're taking over the world. And, life is not what you think, and all this stuff. And so eventually Roddy Piper's character gets his hands on these sunglasses that once he puts them on, suddenly when he flips through a magazine, he sees all these subliminal messages like buy more and obey and all these other, and then he's like, even on billboards, he sees, just all this stuff telling him, to keep the status quo going. And then he starts looking at some people and he sees they're not human. There's something else. There's some kind of, now they're not reptilian, which, that's one group of, like David Icke's group, one kind of conspiracy theorist that, that loves to quote this movie. So the idea is that the blinders are lifted off when he wears these sunglasses, and he sees the world for what it is, and he sees it as an absolute sham. The movie is also the home of a classic line that Duke Nukem would end up using later, which is, I'm here to, this is when he starts going on the warpath, essentially, against these aliens, and they live, and he says, I'm here to kick ass and chew bubblegum, and I'm all out of bubblegum. And, most people don't realize that that's where that line came from. But it's a fun film. But it does kind of have a message about, the status quo. And I think it's a short movie. I don't even think it's an hour and a half long. And it's really something that I think a lot of people, it'll make you think. I'm not going to give away, how it all goes down in the plot exactly. But it'll definitely, raise your eyebrows and go, In fact, one of the things that annoys me is that a lot of the conspiracy theorists that use this movie as their, template for what's going on in America today, they forget that one of the subliminal messages that, that Roddy Piper sees through the sunglasses is marry and reproduce, as if those two things perpetuate the system, and this is definitely a movie that's kind of one could make the case that it's anti-capitalist to some degree, but the idea of not anti-market, but anti-capitalist. And, it's ironic. Nobody ever talks about that. To a fault, they completely ignore that, because the same people that would use it, like Alex Jones and whatever, would say, oh, that getting married and having kids is a great thing. And yet John Carpenter, who made this movie, and John Carpenter, of course, being a pretty famous guy for a lot of his films, was clearly saying, no, this is marry and reproduce is part of the problem with what's going on in the world. And so, that's just something to consider. And because I think a lot of times I can come off as saying the same thing. And I don't mind if people do marry and reproduce. But is it, is this something that I'm interested in? No. But so don't think I'm trying not to preach against you here. Okay. But I'm just saying it's something to consider. And clearly I'm not the only one that thinks that way. Anyway. So check that out. I thought it was They Live is just a fun film. Let's see what else we've got. So we've done Dune, Metropolis, They Live. Let's go on to something a little more militaristic. Now, of course, I've talked about my military history in recent episodes of Sovryn Tech, and so obviously I'm not a fan of the military or of that stuff. But this is actually a movie I saw long before I went into the military, and that's pretty much because it came out long before, and I went to theaters to go see it, and it's a fantastic movie. It came out in 1998, which a lot of people call one of the greatest years of movie in history, along with 1987. So, and it has Kurt Russell in it, and it's Soldier. Now, what makes this movie so great? It is a science fiction movie. It's all about a genetically engineered soldier who gets rendered obsolete by a new group, a quote-unquote better group of genetically engineered soldiers. And he essentially gets dumped off on a garbage planet. But when he gets dumped off, he finds out there's actually humans living on this garbage planet. Storyline gets to the point to where he has to defend this group of humans. But what's really impressive about it is that, this is one of those movies that definitely went under the radar. Okay. Kurt Russell is what's so impressive about this film, because he says practically nothing through the whole movie. I mean, he really never talks, and if he does, it's only a sentence or two, even when he does. But you know exactly what he's thinking. You know exactly what's going on. And actually, it's the first Paul W.S. Anderson movie I ever saw, and it just created a proverbial love affair with me for Paul W.S. Anderson's work, including the Resident Evil movies that he would do later, even though Pompeii was an atrocity. I can't believe he made that. But by and large, I love his movies. And this was, Connie Nielsen's in this, Jason Scott Lee. So it's got a really good cast. It's tremendous, and good luck trying to find a copy of this. I think you can get the Blu-ray now. Fortunately, I think I had the Blu-ray a bit back. But Soldier, it's all in what's not said. It's all in the fact that, it turns into a typical kind of, guerrilla action movie, later on. But the way, Kurt Russell's just amazing, and he's so quiet, but he expresses so much to people. And you realize that, so many things, there's a great buildup where it looks like he's doing kind of some crazy things, but then towards, later on in the film, you suddenly realize why he was doing what he was doing. And it has a great message about, because where he kind of lands is sort of a quasi-anarchist society that he ends up on this garbage planet. And you get a message about, perhaps, shaming isn't such a good idea, because you might be wrong about the person and that they were actually trying to help you, etc. There's a lot of messages in it, and just Kurt Russell's amazing. His acting is top drawer in this, because it's all in what he doesnof say. It's a phenomenal film, and like I said, it has great messages in it. So you go hunt that down. Any of the movies I'm talking about on this top 8 list, if you haven't seen Soldier, that's the one. Go catch it. Okay, because it's got a lot of action, some violence, a little gore, but tremendous movie. I really enjoyed that, and it's all about in what's not said that'll really blow your mind. Moving on, let's go on to another movie, and this one's also from 1998. Remember what I said about 98 being such a great year for movies, like The Matrix? All this stuff, and then suddenly Episode 1 came out in 99, right, for Star Wars, and everything went downhill. And this is Dark City. Dark City is also one of those, what some people would call a cult classic, as in it didn't necessarily do so well in the box office. In fact, it just made budget. It was a $27 million budget for that, and in the box office, it only did $27 million, which is pretty bad. But as Rufus Sewell is in it, Kiefer Sutherland, Jennifer Connelly, of course, she looked fantastic and always does a great acting job. William Hurt was in it. And just a tremendous Alex Proyas. I don't know a whole lot of his other work, but he really delivered the goods, because he helped write the film too with David Goyer. Now, David Goyer is a name that a lot of my listeners might recognize. He's tremendous. So anyway, Dark City, all about this, this guy who comes to this realization that the world is changing every night, and people's identities are changing all the time. And you find out that there's this, I'm giving it away. So if you want to go watch the movie first, you might want to go watch it. But you find out that there's this, there's this alien race, that, and I won't give the ultimate ending away, but there's this alien race that's really messing with humanity, and they're trying to find out what exactly makes humans human. Like what is their, what drives them, what compels them to keep going. And so they do kind of these weird experiments where they keep rewriting, everybody's like lot in life, like this, the same woman one day could be, could be a pauper, essentially. And then, whenever the clock hits like midnight, everybody goes to sleep, and then they'll inject the human. And then that same woman the next day, they'll put her in a mansion, and she'll be the rich. And so they're trying to figure out, what is the real core of a human being, despite their circumstances and all this stuff. And it's very much a Matrix-like film, because you get that same thing where, like Neo, you have this messianic kind of character who, really figures out what's going on and starts seeing how it all goes. Often, it's often a theme in science fiction, like we mentioned with They Live and even Dune, where these characters come to the realization that the world is really fucked up. They always kind of knew it, but then finally they get the means to do something about it. And that's an empowering message, I think. But Dark City is very much like The Matrix a lot. In fact, it has like the whole dark edge to it and everything. It was being developed long before The Matrix was. So some people would make the claim that there was a copying going on. But I don't know that that's true. I don't think that really, either movie copied off of each other. Maybe, if anything, The Matrix copied off of Dark City, because Dark City is just really far out. That clearly would have been the more original idea, in my opinion. And just a great movie. And I definitely recommend that one if you've never seen it. And it's funny because I almost walked out of it. Like halfway through, I almost walked out of the theater. And because I was like, what the hell is this? But then it all kind of, just because I didn't like the whole, I didn't enjoy the whole darkness of it and all that. But I'm glad the 90s they were getting very experimental with films, with mainstream films, not just indie films. They were getting incredibly experimental, and I think that's great. And you get gems like Dark City that came out, and you get a year like 1998. So anyway, let's move on from Dark City. You can check that out, but definitely one of the best of the bunch. And just to really, when everything comes together in Dark City, the movie just becomes amazing. Kind of like, remember the movie Wild Things with Kevin Bacon and Denise Richards and all that? When you finally see how everything happened in the movie, and you get this culmination of stuff, it actually ends up being this really great film instead of just being sexy, right? And I'm talking about Wild Things as far as being sexy. I don't know if there's anything sexy about Dark City. So really unique aesthetic, definitely worth checking out. And I didn't give away the main ending. That was kind of shocking, I think. Anyway, moving on to just a few months ahead from when Dark City came out. This did technically come out in 1999, though I still kind of class it as in that realm before Episode 1 came out and suddenly all movies turned terrible. And it's Wing Commander. And Wing Commander this is the movie, not the games. Now, I have talked about many times, Wing Commander are some of my favorite video games. They definitely top the list. And Chris Roberts, actually, the Wing Commander games were so damn popular that, and they were, especially Wing Commander 3, 4, and Prophecy, they were movie productions in and of themselves, and they kept getting more and more expensive. So I think Hollywood thought it was just logical that, hey, this guy's already making these things into movies. Let's make a movie. In fact, let's do a trilogy. Let's try and make this a new Star Wars, okay? And that made sense because in the games, not in the movie is Freddie Prinze Jr., but in the games, Mark Hamill, a.k.a. Luke Skywalker, was the lead character, Christopher Blair, Major Christopher Blair, and or Colonel Blair, right? Colonel Christopher Blair, depending on which game you're playing. So anyway, they made a movie, and this is a movie where you might watch it and you go, well, that really wasn't that grand. It was definitely better in the 90s as far as effects go and all that stuff, and even then a lot of people complained about the effects. And they put in a cast. They had Saffron Burrows, and they had Matthew Lillard and Freddie Prinze Jr., who were at the time were incredibly popular for, the Scream movies. Or was it the Scream films or whatever? Or no, I mean, Matthew Lillard, I think, was popular for that. Freddie Prinze Jr., those guys were a little more popular for Scooby-Doo down the line. Also, anyway, I can't remember all that teeny bopper bullshit. Really bullshit. So they were trying to appeal to a really young audience by putting together this really young and kind of at the time hip acting, cast. And Jürgen Prochnow was also in this, by the way. We mentioned him earlier that he was in Dune. And David Warner was also in it. And they tried to make that kind of a thing, too, because David Warner had sort of just come off the heels of playing an incredibly minor character in the movie Titanic. But Titanic was such a cultural force at the time that, that really anybody, even if you were just a stagehand on Titanic, you were a name. You were a big name. So in my opinion, they grabbed David Warner for that sort of thing because he played Admiral Toland, who was far better played in the video games by McDonnell. Malcolm McDowell. Sorry, not McDonnell. And this movie, the greatness in this film isn't so much the film itself. And I've talked about this to some degree before. I remember I did a two-parter. If you're a longtime listener of Sovryn Tech, I did a two-parter a while back where it was about Power Rangers. And I said, yeah, Power Rangers was good in the 90s, especially if you were young. But the real beauty of Power Rangers was always in the potential of where it could go. And sometimes at what it hinted at what was going on. And I think this is the case, at least for me, with Wing Commander, is that there's all these like really great ideas, especially if you have, it's not really a rare book. I think you can get your hands on a copy if you go to Amazon. You're not going to find it in an ebook. And it's the Wing Commander, the flight manual, which these things were also popular in the 90s too. And I just ate them up. I mean, because I have this ridiculous obsession to learn all that is learnable. And so even in imaginary universes like Wing Commander, I just got to know every goddamn thing. And this Wing Commander flight manual or technical manual that they made for the movie, again, these were popular in the 90s where they just, I mean, they generally always sell gangbusters. And you find out a lot of what the movie doesn't tell you about. Like in the movie, so Wing Commander is all about this battle between Earth or the Terran Confederation and a cat-like species called the Kilrathi Empire. And, it's basically, a war film. I mean, it's not really unique in that, but obviously it's all in outer space. And, but this is where things get pretty wild because this part of the story isn't in the games at all. It's not what made the games great. This was unique to the movies and I really like it, but you find out that there's when humans started going up into space, that space actually, they started to evolve differently when they went into space. And eventually they could, somehow they could just navigate wormholes completely on their own, which later on would require a technology to get developed. So there's no warp drives at all. You not exactly anyway. You would actually navigate quasars and all this other stuff to get through shortcuts in the universe to get around or in the galaxy. And so you get into these really wild ideas that actually just recently are becoming more scientifically, explored, I guess I should say. And like there's parallel tonality, which is the idea that your brain is not, and this is discussed again, you wouldn't get it in the movie, but if you read the technical manual, it's there. And also if you read, Peter Tellep did a trilogy of books. He wrote the novelization for the movie, which is a lot better than the movie, admittedly. He also wrote a book called Pilgrim Stars, which is a sequel to the movie. It was incredible. And then the third book in that trilogy never actually got released, but you can more or less find the book out there on the internet in various torrent sites, and it was called Pilgrim Truth. And these things explore a lot more of this race called the Pilgrims. These are the people that started evolving once they went into space. And it's this really wild idea. It's really cool. And you find out that historically there was actually a war between the Pilgrims and the Terran Confederation. Of course, the Pilgrims thought they were better than the average humans, and so that becomes this big issue. But there's a lot of scientific principles that get discussed, like parallel tonality, where the idea is that your brain is actually a receiver for information, and it's not a store of information, as in, the universe is, to use a tech comparison, the universe is the cloud, and your mind is not a hard drive. You're just accessing the cloud with it. Okay. As to where, common science today accepts that your brain is actually a hard drive and it's not accessing the cloud. So, that's a pretty wild idea. And that explains how the Pilgrims knew how to navigate the galaxy so well, is because they had access to the cloud essentially once they left the Earth. So, a lot of these ideas, and there's a degree where I think the movie is kind of sexy. A lot of these ideas are there, and they're just really cool. And it's a movie where you can really see the potential. It's like, wow, this could have really been a cool exploration of ideas. And you kind of get to explore them in Peter Tellip's novelizations from it. But I would have loved to have seen what Chris Roberts, the creator, would have done with it. Now, of course, Chris Roberts is moving on to Star Citizen. Will he take, because Star Citizen, the game Star Citizen that's coming out, I've talked about plenty of times in Sovryn Tech, that Chris Roberts is making, the original creator of Wing Commander. He took a lot of cues from his Wing Commander series and put him into Star Citizen. So if there's going to be a grand storyline for Star Citizen, boy, I hope he puts in something like the Pilgrims, because I thought that was such a cool idea. So feel free to check out Wing Commander. It's really a far underrated film. And in fact, boy, talk about something that's underrated. I haven't discussed the soundtracks to a lot of these movies, but most of these movies have pretty great soundtracks, or not most, but quite a few of them do. Like Dune's soundtrack by the band Toto, who a lot of people know by, they did the song Rosanna, Borderline, Rain in Africa. Lots of great songs in the 80s. But anyway, the theme for the movie Dune is tremendous. I mean, it's just a classic. I've played it on Sovryn Tech before because it's just so damn good. I had to get it in there. And ironically, also, the theme for Wing Commander by David Arnold of, at the time, Independence Day fame, and also he's known now for scoring most of the James Bond movies in recent years. The theme for Wing Commander, that I also played at one point. In fact, it might have been in the same episode that I played the Dune theme. I played the Wing Commander theme, because both themes are probably two of the best, if not the best, in cinematic history. So the soundtrack to Wing Commander, if you can get your hands on that, you're in for a ride. In fact, David Arnold only composed the theme, and then Kevin Kilner did the rest of it. But he's also the same guy that scored the Clone Wars, Star Wars: The Clone Wars, the cartoon that recently ended. And he just does a bang up job. It's a tremendous soundtrack. So that's almost worth it alone. So the movie is, it's standard fare, but all the possibilities that you can kind of contemplate, and some of like the things hinted at, and then of course the soundtrack really makes it for, in my opinion, I put it in my top 8 of greatest science fiction films of all time, easy. And I don't think you don't really need to know the Wing Commander video games at all to really appreciate it for what it is. So it definitely makes the cut. Let's see, what have we talked about so far? We did Dune, we did Metropolis, They Live, Soldier, Dark City, Wing Commander. We've only got a couple more. But let's get into what is, this is probably, okay, it's not my favorite movie of all time, but this, I think, maybe technically the greatest science fiction movie of all time. Now, there's a reason for that. There's an importance behind that. Why is it technically the greatest science fiction movie of all time? Because it's really what every other science fiction movie is based upon. Modern science fiction as we understand it today, from the marine type thing, that everybody loves with Halo, from Star Wars, from Star Trek, and a lot of the technologies in Star Trek, all this stuff, all these different ideas and theories. This one really, this is where all those ideas came from. It's pretty much between the Foundation series of novels and Forbidden Planet, the movie. That's where just about everything we know of as far as, as far as modern science fiction, that's where it all comes from. Okay, and this movie's a classic. It's from 1956. Had, ironically, Leslie Nielsen playing a very serious role. Of course, and being very young. A lot of people remember Leslie Nielsen from the Naked Gun movies or the various films that he made, especially in the 90s. That, like Spy Hard and some others where, he's a ridiculous character. He's a comedic actor. But he was deadly serious in this, and he does a great job. You can really see, actually, I think you can see a lot of the parallels between him and Captain Kirk in it. And I mean, there's robots in it. There's all there's all these technologies, all these things that you'll really come to realize. There's even things that very much look like the transporters, but they're not transporters. They're just designed, because this is some hard science fiction too, while it's at it, which is very rare. There's these tubes you get into for when the ship that and the ship in it pretty much just looks like a flying saucer, more or less. But not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, scientifically, I think a lot of people thought it was solid, that's the kind of the design you would want. When that ship would go faster than light, okay, you couldn't, as a human, handle that speed. And so you would get into a tube that looked very much like a transporter, and the tube would kind of phase you to some degree, as in PHASE. Okay, it would phase you sort of in and out in that speed and keep you at a relative speed, while the ship itself was obviously breaking relativity itself. So, really thought out, really well thought out. But you can see so many things, ship's doctors, all this stuff, all these really great ideas that would later get implemented throughout science fiction. And there's a great story. This is another thing where there's, like Wing Commander, where there's hints. It's a great story on its own. It's not like Wing Commander where it had a very weak or bland story or blasé. But there's hints of really powerful things. And I talked about this recently on Sovereign Tech. I think just maybe, this past week's episode, where, there's a story about the Krell and how J. Michael Straczynski, the creator of Babylon 5, he's actually going to do a trilogy based on what happened to the Krell. And there's all this great stuff. It's a really rich universe. And it's a shame it never got touched on more. It really is. So, Forbidden Planet, totally worth a watch if you've never seen it. And yeah. I mean, what else is there really to say about it other than that? You can see the basis of every other movie since 1956, every other science fiction movie within it. But it stands incredibly well on its own, and it really does. And in fact, the score, speaking of soundtracks again, this was the first movie to have a completely electronic soundtrack. That was a very new idea. That was really groundbreaking at the time for it to be completely electronic. Now, it's not, the most interesting soundtrack. There's nothing really that exciting about it, but it is unique. It was a first. No one had done that before, and they pulled it off. So it's a movie with really, it still stands up today because everything just looks so good, especially if you get a good 1080p remaster of it. A great movie. So moving on, let's get into, I don't want this really to go much past an hour. So let's get to the last of our top 8 here. And this is something that did have a television series made out of it, but the television series, I don't know, it botched with, I think, what the idea was for the movie itself. This is also a movie that was made out of a book. And the original book did end up becoming a trilogy, actually. And, and there's been recently, I think Blue Water Comics did kind of a sequel comic series to it, which was interesting. But really, it stands on its own very uniquely and is definitely different from the book in some key ways. And it's Logan's Run. Now, Logan's Run, it came out before Star Wars, before the original Star Wars. This came out in 1976. And it was quite a production. And it's a really wild film. It's a far out film. You're going to hear you'll hear a lot of people, especially if you're a science fiction fan, but you haven't embraced a whole lot of science fiction history, you're going to find, as soon as you watch this movie, you're going to see just how often it gets referenced because it's that influential of a film. And it starred Michael York. Michael York did a hell of a job in this, and he would go on to play roles in a million different science fiction things. He was in the third season of Sequest. He's really known for, being in the Austin Powers movies, but he'd be all over the place. Always a great villain, but in this case, he's the hero. And not that he was a villain in the Austin Powers movies either. But Logan's Run is, it takes place in the far future, and essentially you can... everybody, humanity all lives inside of these domes, okay? And it's a very, what one would commonly call hedonistic culture. Now, it's not hedonism as I would use it, but what a lot of people would say would be hedonism. This is it. Everything's just, it's pure pleasure all the time. It's a very high-tech society, and it all just kind of runs on its own. But there's a catch. That, yes, life is grand. People are having sex everywhere. It's really wild. In fact, there's a great scene where, the movie's so open to sexuality. There's a great scene where Michael York's character named Logan 5, they have numbers. Logan 5 he's like looking to have a good time, okay? And so he can actually choose somebody, like there's somebody on like the dating grid, essentially. And he can hook up with them. Okay. And he can choose. And there's a point where on the dating grid, like he'll actually, like a guy appears instead of just women. And he's just like, yeah, not really. But you get the hint that, oh yeah, because the guy kind of like does this, kind of looks at him quizzically. And so there's very, very open to homosexuality, very open to, there's orgies happening constantly throughout the film under the dome. And so, that's unique to see in 1976, especially in mainstream film. Which I thought was really cool. But anyway, at 30, this is the catch of the whole society, okay? At 30, you're dead. That's it. You die, okay? You have these crystals on your hand that actually kind of tell like this little crystal in the palm of your hand that tells your age. And when when that crystal turns red, like I think initially you start yellow or blue, then it becomes green as you're growing up. And then when you get into your late 20s, it turns red, which means you're getting close to, red, you're dead, right? So, but there's this lie that exists within this society of being renewed. Okay, where you actually, they kind of tell you, well, you'll be reincarnated. Okay, you never actually die, you're immortal. But it's not true. People die. And so there's this event that occurs called Carousel, which is really, you'll never see anything quite like it in any other science fiction film. But you have this police force within, everybody's pretty much doing whatever they want. So it's not like crime occurs, but there is one crime that can occur. And so there's a police force called Sandmen that have to hunt down what are called runners. That's why it's called Logan's Run. And what runners are is they're people who do not want to go through Carousel, who do not want to go through renewal. And, so they try, when they turn 30, they try to get away. And they try to hide. And so there's this whole kind of rebel movement you find out about that exists, under the domes. And I'm leaving out a whole ton. There's so much more to discuss as far as that goes. But this is really, and not ironically, it's a sexy movie, okay? But what's not sexy about it, it's not the orgies, It's not the rooms full of nude people and all that actually makes this movie sexy. Because what it's about is Logan... actually, he kind of gets ordered by this computer that seems to be running everything. This computer tells him you need to find what they call sanctuary. And sanctuary is this idea where you can, instead of renewing, you can get away and you can live past 30 by getting to sanctuary. And so the computer that runs the dome, that runs humanity pretty much, tells Logan, okay, you can, you are now tasked with finding sanctuary and destroying it. And so it's all about Logan trying to get out of the city, getting out of the domes. And eventually he does with the help of a woman who is part of this, rebellion. Boy, when they get outside, it kind of has this sort of Adam and Eve feel because there's no one else really out there. And they escape and there's of course some various trials and tribulations, to be able to escape. But when they get out there and it's just them and the world is beautiful, maybe, these domes were built because of some kind of nuclear holocaust to protect everybody that's within inside them, who knows? But now the Earth is gorgeous, and they're just living it up. They take their clothes off and they go swimming in a pool and everything, and they go around. And unfortunately, they end up in Washington, D.C. Now, if you want to rebuild society, that's the last place I'd want to go to, right? But yeah, there's just this very much, the sexy idea of, two against the world, you and a lover, and it's just the two of you, or maybe not just the two of you, but the idea is that, there's just that bond between a couple of people, or, it could be more, but obviously, I'm a huge proponent of polyamory, but yeah, it's just, I don't know. There's something to that whole idea that really makes you think. And anyway, the movie ends up, Logan doesn't. You find out there isn't any sanctuary, and that most people that have actually escaped from the domes didn't really escape. I'm not going to give away a whole lot of the hints of that, but the movie ends off with a definite ending that anything you've read since, okay, like the comic book series that was released later, or the TV series, doesn't really touch on. So because, something happens to the society within the domes, and that's all I'm going to kind of say about it. But an awesome, also, I will hint at this. If you love cats, you'll love this movie. Like, I don't mean the Broadway play Cats. I mean the actual animal. If you love cats, you would love this film. So it's a great movie. It's another one where there's nothing quite like it, and I think that's a lot of what I was trying to do here with the science fiction top 8, is that there's no other movies quite like these, and that's what makes them so damn great. So let's rerun over what exactly were the top 8 sci-fi movies of all time in the Golden Stallion's opinion. And of course, it started off with Dune, the original Dune with David Lynch from 1984, Metropolis, the 1927 Metropolis, not the anime, and Forbidden Planet from 1956, They Live from 1988, Soldier from 1998, Dark City from 1988, Wing Commander, which technically should have been 1998. Soldier, Dark City, and Wing Commander, in my opinion, are all 1998 films. And then last and certainly not least would be Logan's Run from 1976, perhaps the greatest science fiction movie, or not, it would have been, before Star Wars, that would have topped my list, just for the sheer sexiness of it. So anyway, if you haven't seen these movies, I get the sense that a lot of my audience has already seen most of these, but if you haven't, these are the ones to check out. I think these are the movies that get referenced a lot, and if they're not ones that are referenced a lot, they're ones that really that deserve a good second look at, and also they're ones where, to spur the imagination. Because I think that's a lot of fun to do with so many different movies and series, is what are they not saying, or what are they hinting at? This is what made Alfred Hitchcock movies so great, right? Is that he never really revealed, he never totally showed you what was happening, and you had to use your imagination. And when I use my imagination with some of these movies, especially Wing Commander, oh man, I end up with stuff, just incredible ideas, tremendous thoughts, and really, again, some really sexy moments. I have to say. So check them out. Anyway, I don't want to go into too much more about this. I will be doing a lot more top 8 specials, and I'll try and keep them a little more particular. Maybe I'll do a top 8 historical films or something. I'm certainly open to doing that. And I didn't mention, I didn't get into movies that are part of a series, because that really opens up all kinds of things as far as science fiction goes. Like, I love the Resident Evil movies, obviously Star Wars, obviously Star Trek, The Matrix. Is a tremendous film series. I know a lot of people didn't like the second and third one. I loved them. I thought the second one was great. I totally disagree. This is something that's going around, and there was an article actually in Huffington Post that I think they even did a top 8, oddly enough, where they said maybe it was 6, I don't know, but it was, or maybe it was more. It might have been 12 or 20, I don't know. But they said these are the movies that, when upon re-examination, actually aren't that good. And The Matrix was in that list. I don't understand how that could be. That movie still stands out. That movie's still amazing. That movie's still eye-opening. That movie was so world-changing. I mean, the phrases in that movie, the ideas in that movie are used way more than they live, which we talked about. I mean, it changed the cultural concept of so many things. You know, the world is literally different since The Matrix came out. And the movie still, it's got a great style. The soundtrack is amazing, but I guess, side tangent. That soundtrack was rated as one of the greatest soundtracks of all time. And now people listen to it and they hate it. They're like, oh, it's too depressing and too droning. Wait a minute. Weren't you saying the same exact fucking news outlets saying back then, oh no, the music was awesome, this is great? These people are they're so full of shit. There's that one guy, Joe Levy, that works for Rolling Stone, and this guy, he just sells out to whatever is popular at the time. And he's not even telling you what's popular. He just wants to, I don't know, he's just vying for relevance. You know what I mean? And look, I don't really care for, I mean, it had Du Hast on it. It had Monster Magnet. It had some other great bands on there. So, and Marilyn Manson and all great stuff. I thought the soundtracks for all those movies were great, but it just shows how people are so fickle and how they totally believe what's good based upon what someone else tells them is good. The Matrix was amazing, but I'm not even getting into that. There's a ton of series of films that I could go into. Maybe top 8 science fiction shows might be the next one, or maybe the top 8 fiction books. If you've got one in particular, if you got a topic that you actually want me to talk about, where you want me to do a top 8, you can email me, sovereigntech@riseup.net, or get in touch with me on BitMessage. Take your pick. And let me know, and maybe I'll do it. So anyway, I'm going to be at PorkFest this week. You're going to get a double load this week. Don't worry. I always tell you, when I go away, I make sure you got plenty to listen to. Okay. So you got a double load coming. You're going to have this episode, and then you'll have a great episode 80 of Sovryn Tech, where I had the lovely and hyper intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy on, and I thought it was just an awesome episode. Tons of information covered, tons of really interesting ideas, and a lot of what I feel was a lot of vindication that came out this week. And I will say that while I'm at PorkFest, Google I.O. will be going on, Google's big event. I will be covering that in episode 81. Believe me. Okay. But obviously I'm not going to be doing, maybe I'll do a special on it the following week or whatever, but I'm going to be finding out about it, kind of indirectly, and I'll have to watch it later. So don't come to me for news this whole past week, because I'm at PorkFest, and I'm kind of happy to not be on the internet so much while I'm there. So I'll catch up on it, and I'll give you a full wrap up of what I think, my response to a lot of what's going on there. So anyway, hope you enjoyed this. I think I rambled a bit, but that's okay. Feel free, if you enjoy anything I do, again, don't hesitate. Look in the show notes. In the show notes, there's, all the ways you can donate to the show. And again, one of the best things you can do if you want to help out the show is always to get my Twitter numbers up, even my Google Plus numbers up. But the number one thing is SoundCloud numbers. Those are the single most important. SoundCloud and Twitter is really a big deal. And don't hesitate. The certificate to be friends with me on RetroShare is there, as well as my BitMessage address is in the show notes. Okay, you just got to find them, but they are there. So anyway, Carpe Lucem. We'll get some more specials out. I'll see you on the other side.
You just experienced Sovryn Tech. Go to sovereigntech.com, that's SOVRYN tech.com, and connect with us there. Find links from today's show and catch our podcast feed. Sovryn Tech is copy heart. Copying art is an act of love, and love is not subject to law. So please share the show however you like. Welcome to the evolution.